For the first time since they were bounced out of the Copa America, the senior U.S. men's national team back in action on Saturday against Canada in Kansas City, then the following Tuesday against New Zealand in Cincinnati. And there's a lot of loose ends. There's a lot of exciting developments. There's a lot of let's roll up the sleeves and get back to it. I'm going to go over some of the storylines. And of course, the big one, without question, the one we have talked about, I think, on my last 3 or 4 episodes, is the status of Mauricio Pochettino. We will go over all of that. We'll preview the roster. We'll preview the game, which has a very interesting subplot, mind you, here today on the Soccer OG. Check out the Soccer OG podcast, where all podcasts are available. New one coming out on Wednesday. Brian Sciaretta of American Soccer Now will join us. We'll talk about that roster. We'll talk about Poch as well. Like and subscribe is here. Hit that like button. Let's keep it going. We'll get a lot more videos going. I love joining you guys here on a regular basis. I want to make it more regular. Check out my Instagram too. I got some interesting content I'm going to start putting up there. Mbredos, my name, there on IG. So yes, we got some news, and hopefully by the time you listen to this video, pen is to paper for Mauricio Pochettino as he takes over the U.S. men's national team job. Fabrizio Romano, the preeminent soccer reporter who is percentile of getting things right, is probably in the 90s, if not higher, saying that Poch is set to sign this week. It was tweeted out and put on social media on Tuesday as new U.S. men's national team head coach. Verbal agreement weeks ago, and now we wait. And when I hear that, I think Wednesday. So watch this and we'll talk more about Pochettino later in the week and what that means moving forward. I know he wants to get into this. There was some intrepidation because Manchester United were flailing. And I wouldn't even throw Everton in here. I think that's a big job, sort of, that maybe Pochettino could be lured over. So the longer this went on, the more nervous you got. Certainly for Manchester United, but they're not going to part ways with Erik ten Hag yet. But I think that is coming soon. It was a very uncomfortable situation after they were just completely blasted by Liverpool. So we're all up in the air. I believe I was the first to tweet that. A lot of people brought into the news cycle, but that's what I do. I get on top of these things first. But that's not going to happen. We can lock it down thanks to Fabrizio Romano, a trusted source. And they say he's not going to be involved in these September games, which he won't. Maybe it would be very cool if you see him pop up in the stands. I think he had some communication with this roster, or at least a direction, because there is a direction with it. We'll go over it. Not too much detail. We'll talk about the game. We'll be back here on these channels to recap the games and get ready for October, where there's another game. And we get ready for 2025 and 2026. But we're really looking at the players. We're looking at the players and how they perform with their clubs, what kind of team this will be. I can tell you this is a very young team, which to me screams Pochettino. And there are, I think, all but 1 or 2 of the players are 23 years or younger. I wrote that down. I can't read my handwriting. So it's a very young team, which I think is something Pochettino wants to approach this job. I think it's great. We have some great young players. We have to lean into the guys in their late 20s, I think, a little bit. But, I saw the Copa America team, which was a young team, and they weren't ready for that moment. And if we have to lean into veteran players, whatever that looks like, then we should do that. So this is an opportunity. But if they're getting this opportunity, and I don't want to look too much into the September roster, because there's a lot of guys that aren't involved, that will be involved, you would imagine. All these players are on their toes and know they have to impress in whatever way that is, on the field, off the field. They all know, as we all go through this, when there's a new job, there's a new boss, you have got to go above and beyond. Even if you've played well up to that point, like a Christian Pulisic. Christian Pulisic's job is not in peril, but you want to show that you can be the guy and maybe get into a bigger role. Regarding Poch, I saw Doug McIntyre and an article. He asked the guys at the camp in Kansas City, and Tim Ream said, "We know as much as you do." So we shall see. But I hope it gets done here on a Wednesday and maybe Thursday the latest. And Who knows? I mean, if Mauricio Pochettino signed the papers, why wouldn't he make his way to Kansas City to see this team play? So Mikey Varas is in charge, a guy who knows young players, and that's part of the reason why he is going to take over at San Diego FC in Major League Soccer. He is the coach apparent, and that tells me San Diego FC wants to go a younger route with players, so they're hiring a coach who specializes in that. And we heard all those things about San Diego FC, that they're going to go for big international coach, Piojo Herrera, big Mexican coaches, and then they're going to go here with Mikey Varas. It could be, I don't know. I like Mikey. I think he does a good job, and he is very good. He has a good eye for talent. So a 24-man roster. Now, there are some injuries. Tyler Adams, Tim Weah, Serginho Dest, obviously the big one that missed out on Copa America. Gianluca Busio is also out injured, so they're not part of this team. There's also a few players that have been given a rest so they can either rest their bodies or get acclimated to a new club. That is Weston McKennie, who recently signed with Juventus. Anthony Robinson, who based on all accounts has put a massive workload on for Fulham and is a man considered the best left back in the Premier League by some. And then there's Tanner Tessman and Cameron Carter-Vickers. Tanner Tessman just signed with Lyon. You don't want to pull him out of there, so that makes sense. Of, those names I taught you, if there's a 23-man roster for an important game, Adams would be on it, Dest would be on it, Weah would be on it, McKennie would be on it, and Anthony Robinson. So 5 key players. Tanner Tessman, really all 8 of those names have a chance to be on it. Carter-Vickers and Busio on the outside, perhaps looking in. Tanner Tessman with the idea of being a guy who can take over that deeper line midfield role if it doesn't work out with Tyler Adams or Johnny Cardoso, the latter who is on this team. So 24 players. The 24th player is Diego Cochin, who's the 18-year-old goalkeeper with Barcelona. As you know, the goalkeeping situation is dire. Matt Turner's a backup. No one's really playing at a super high level like we are accustomed to having on this national team. Ethan Horvath, who's at Cardiff City in the championship. We've already seen some tape of him where he's given up some poor goals. Patrick Schulte, who is one of 2 MLS players on this roster. I think part of it is because MLS is still got some games, but that's a small part of it. I truly believe MLS players will not be represented on this national team unless it's an emergency situation for an older player. And I think that might lie in a goalkeeper role. I think Patrick Schulte is in his final season with Columbus before he makes a move to Europe. He has got the look of potentially the future starter, and it looks like Columbus are bringing in new goalkeepers, preparing for that moment. This is a guy that Wilfred Nancy discovered, developed, and now he's ready for the big time, so we expect that. Matt Turner, who is now a Crystal Palace player, we'll see if he starts. That would be huge news if he becomes the Crystal Palace #1, but we don't know at this point. I love the addition of Cochin. I mean, he's not going to play, but give him a look, let him get into camp, and let Mauricio Pochettino weave his magic, because he is Cochin is a candidate that could go play for Spain or somewhere else. They're keeping tabs on him. This is a good young keeper with Barcelona, so you know they're going to take good care of him. So I like the fact that they bring him in here and he can develop relationships and see how he reacts in this kind of circumstance. Defenders, I believe there are 8. We mentioned those that aren't participating. Tim Ream is back, which surprised me a little bit because I figured his days are numbered as a featured player. I don't think he's going to make the World Cup. We'll see if he can make 2025, but he's there. Mark McKenzie, Austin Trusty, Chris Richards, whose position at Crystal Palace might be in peril because they just signed 2. They brought in 3 new center backs, but he's still starting for them. And then Joe Scally, Caleb Wiley, who's now at Strasbourg and is playing pretty regularly for them in the couple games thus far. Marlon Fossey, another LA kid who's at Standard Liège. He's 25 years of age. He comes in as another fullback, which is great to see. A guy who's been putting it in. Grew up in England, was with Fulham, and now with Standard Liège, which is a great club in Belgium. So we're happy about that. Midfield, thinned out a fair bit with Cardoso, Johnny Cardoso, Luca Della Torre, Yunus Musa, Gio Reyna, and Malik Tillman. I can't read. Well, anyway, it's listed there. So those are the 6 there. And then up front, which I think is the most interesting group, the forwards, Brendan Aronson, Flo Balogun, Ricardo Pepi, Christian Pulisic, Josh Sargent and Haji Wright. We'll get into some of the key players. I think it's pretty, you can expect what it's going to look like. It's going to look like the Copa team. There's just a couple players, and I was mentioning, those are guys that are MLS based. And, I just want to reiterate, because there's some people that will tell you straight in the face there's an MLS quota on the national team, and that is clearly not the case. That is a figment of the imagination. Anything that sounds as ridiculous as that is exactly that, and this is a case to that. I think there are players like a Miles Robinson, if the defenders don't look into place, that could be Brenner or Walker Zimmerman, and maybe a couple other players, and that's about it. But that is the MLS participation. This is going to be a European squad through and through, which is very good news. I don't think we're at the height of our European participation. A lot of guys aren't playing enough. Some guys are not playing at all. Gio Reyna is a perfect example that we may have to find a different route for, but he's still on there, and I think that's a player that Mauricio Pochettino will like, because we don't have a player like him, really. We don't. It's pretty limited with certain positions, and that's part of it. I mean, we're going to have a reality check with the U.S. team, and Mauricio Pochettino is going to have a big job, and it could look familiar, or it might not. It might not. We'll get a little bit of a look against this Canada game. The subplot I talked about is the coaches, as we get to see Jesse Marsch going against the U.S. team. He's going to really want to win this game. This game really means nothing. It's going to be a little glorified, friendly, so to speak. A long way to go, but not that much for the U.S. And there's a good opportunity for those players because of those 8 guys that I mentioned that are either injured or not being called in. So I think that means Mark McKenzie, who's off to a great start in French football. Caleb Wiley, I think, might get some minutes here. Austin Trusty, I imagine Tim Ream and Richard starts. Mark McKenzie and or Trusty get some minutes at some point. Austin Trusty, he's an incredible story, but he went to Celtic, which means he's going to play in Champions League football. But it also, I was hoping he would move to the Premier League because he was at Sheffield United and maybe who got relegated, that maybe he could get brought in, but he wasn't there. So hopefully he gets a chance. He's in the system, and let's see what he has. The midfield is pretty straightforward. I think you will. I mean, it's interesting. Reyna's being listed there. No, it's not interesting, but he could be listed in a couple places. But I think Reyna, Musa, Cardoso probably starts. Not too shabby with the lack of players that are not there in the attacking positions. And then the best opportunity for me is in the attack. Flo Balogun will be the number 9, although he hasn't done much for Monaco. He started a couple of their first 3 games, didn't start a third, hasn't scored. So I thought he did well in the Copa America. He was one of the bright spots, so I'm all in on Flo Balogun. There is some competition in Haji Wright and Josh Sargent, who have both been doing very well in the championship, as is Brandon Aronson. All 3 of those have been great. Aiden Morris is on this team. That's the name I couldn't read. He has been doing great in the championship, which is good. We have to take a grain of salt because our players doing well in the championship's great news. But it is the championship. And for so long we have said, okay, maybe the championship's not a drop-off from the Premier League. It is. And the comparison to MLS, it's probably pretty close to that. Those leagues have some positives and negatives when you compare the two. But we would like to see these guys get out of the championship. Josh Sargent should be out of the championship. Haji Wright should be out of the championship very soon too. Brendan Aronson, I think, needs to cook down there a little bit. But we need some of these guys to get out. The 2 guys that I mentioned, Wright and Sargent, are so intriguing because they can play a couple positions. And they could be pretty prolific. And they could put the pressure on Flo Balogun to see where it goes. So I think that really is to see who could maybe get that 3rd center back spot. Who starts as the goalkeeper? I think it will probably be Turner and then Schulte. And who accompanies Pulisic and Balogun at the top? We shall see. Some interesting things. Enjoy the games. It's good to be back, right, after the disappointment of the summer. Check out the Soccer OG podcast, where all podcasts are available. Like and subscribe us here, and we'll be back to recap the games, to get a closer look this week. It's exciting times. Enjoy your time in Kansas City if you can get out there and support the guys.